Special thanks to Tokyo Treat and Sakurako for sponsoring today's video. Every now and then, though perhaps more often than usual during the final arc, certain fights come around that feel like genuine fanfiction, in the best possible way. Ichibei Hyosube vs Yhwach is one such fight, a true clash of the titans, the likes of which we have seen very few of in Bleach so far. Two monstrous powerhouses at the apex of their respective sides, letting loose to the fullest extent of their abilities. If you had told me, back in, say, 2012, that the time would eventually come where the all-powerful leader of the Zero Division would be fighting the resurrected King of the Quincy's in the Royal Palace for the fate of the Soul King hanging in the balance, I'd have laughed. Told you that I'd love to see that one day, and then have gone about my business. It's the very definition of a pie-in-the-sky for the fans moment. Bleach wish fulfillment at its finest. Kubo knew this would be big, and he knew he had to deliver, and I think he does in almost every single way, to the point where this may very well be the very best fight of the 1000-Year Blood War arc. There's a lot to love about this milestone tentpole battle. Now, that's subjective of course, but this battle does and gets so very much right. More so than ever, the stakes feel sky high, which, at this particular juncture in the narrative, is crucial. Ichibei is the very last thing standing between Yhwach and his goal, the Soul King, and thanks to the anime, we have a much better idea of what it is Yhwach is actually after here. Remember, back when we were reading this weekly, we didn't really know what Yhwach actually wanted outside of nebulously wanting to kill the Soul King. We had literally no idea why he would want to do that, and it turns out that his goal is very different to Aizen's. While they may have the same driving ambition, they both want to kill the Soul King, they both want to do so for very different reasons, and the anime has really helped to hammer that home and reinforce what it is that sets Yhwach apart from Aizen himself. And to be honest, the battle reflects that perfectly, with these two gods dueling to the death at the very entrance to the royal palace itself. Only one is going to leave here alive, and as a result you get the sense that both fighters are actually truly giving it their all, the fate of the world, of all three worlds, quite literally hanging in the balance between these two destined warriors. So, let's dive into this legendary battle today. Truly, it does feel like a myth or a fable from the world of Bleach brought to life on the page before our very eyes, and that is something incredible to behold indeed. Remember guys to consider hitting subscribe down below if you enjoyed today's video. It really is one of the absolute best ways to support the channel, especially if you're new here and you want to stay up to date with all of my videos. It really does mean a lot and it makes the world of difference. Also consider checking out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games, if you're even remotely interested in games, the gaming industry. I'd love to have you over there. I'm trying to put out 1-2 videos every single week and it's going really well, and it's all thanks to your support that really will help to continue getting that channel off the ground and to a place where I really would love it to be. So consider checking out that channel if you haven't done already. If you enjoy games or if you just want to support me, either way, it would be absolutely amazing to have you. So thank you all so very much. A lot has changed since this battle originally took place, and that feels like quite the understatement, to be totally honest. Nowadays, thanks to the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime, the showdown in the Royal Palace holistically feels completely different, as the spectacular 3-part showcase that capped off Part 2 of the anime was dedicated entirely to the standoff between the Zero Division and the Vandenrijk's elite. No longer is that fight the go-to example of the final arc's ability to squander potential, because believe me, we didn't always have it this good. The Zero Division were long seen as Bleach's paragon of total failure, of embarrassment, and of narrative waste. If you watched my live reactions to those episodes, still, by the way, by far and away the most popular live reactions to the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime I've done so far, which I think is very telling of just how invested we collectively as a community were in that rewritten, reshaped battle in the Royal Palace. You'll know I went into them with cautious optimism, under the guise that the original showdown was so obviously flawed in such a huge way that surely they would fix it. And they did. No longer does the story cut away when the battle is seemingly just about to get going for real, later returning to then reveal the off-screen fates of those supposedly godlike warriors that had been introduced alongside the insurmountable expectation that they were somehow stronger than the Gotei 13 combined. No, instead we are treated to a full battle, one that we get to see completed from start to finish. That's so refreshing to be able to say. And yet, despite the misery that was the original Royal Palace showdown all those years ago, one element of it always stood tall, as not only meeting reader expectations but completely exceeding them in many ways. And that was, of course, Ichibei Hyosebe vs Yhwach, the other fight taking place at the same time, separate from the rest of the Zero Division. During the manga's original run, Kubo clearly found himself facing a critical choice, a crossroads. Either focus on the battle between the Zero Division and the Schutzstaffel while also including some of Ichibei vs Yhwach, or focus exclusively on the battle between Ichibei versus Yhwach, because there's no way that fight wasn't going to be covered at all. There was no other route, and to be honest, for the purposes of pushing the narrative forwards, he made the correct choice in my opinion. Ultimately, Ichibei vs Yhwach is the fight that will decide the future of Bleach, and as much as I really wanted to see the other members of the Zero Division, the members of the Schutzstaffel, doing something, specifically the Zero Division members, because the Schutzstaffel do get their time to shine later, there's just no shot, no world in which they exist that they are more important than Ichibei. And also, of course, at the end of the day, it's likely that whoever won that fight, the Zero Division versus the Schutzstaffel, they would just be killed by the opposing leader who won their respective battle, so really it is Ichibei versus Yhwach that decides everything. Running from chapter 604 to chapter 611, this is a true spectacle, and a perfect example of Kubo really pulling out all the stops to cap off this portion of the story in a fitting fashion. Really, this fight marks the very end of the second Quincy invasion portion of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and it's absolutely, in my opinion, the best fight, at least of that portion of the arc, pretty much without a doubt. Ichibei faces off against Yhwach in a battle that proves testament to both their skills, and is really unlike anything we'd seen before. It's like Kubo knew this had to be good, and it is. Time and time again throughout Bleach, we've seen examples of extraordinarily powerful characters not quite letting loose in the way it contextually felt they should given the circumstances, but here that is not a problem. In fact, one of my favourite things about this battle is just how even it seems to be for the most part. One of the biggest issues, the biggest mounting issues that fans had been having with the Thousand Year Blood War arc up until this point is that many of the fights felt like one-sided stomps, either in one direction or then with a dramatic swing to the other. Seemingly gone were the days of characters brutally, evenly, trading balanced blows with one another in a measured, meaningful way. But this fight bucked that trend too. Now, that's not to say it's totally perfect. Ichibei definitely has the upper hand for the majority of the fight, but what's crucial is that Yhwach is actually actively trying to fight back, and has the powers and abilities to do so. In the end, that back and forth, telltale, pendulum swing nature rears its head once again at the climax of the battle, and that's perhaps why it's my least favourite part of the entire thing. To me, Ichibei vs Yhwach remains one of the greatest fights of the arc, but the ending does hold it back somewhat, even though I think the anime has gone to great lengths to try and improve that as well. And we'll get to that later, of course. For now, let's take a brief look at the two combatants of this divine duel. To begin with, I want to revisit that original scenario where Kubo was seemingly forced to choose between the two battles he had laid out, Ichibei vs Yhwach and the Zero Division vs the Schutzstaffel. When it comes to the Zero Division in particular, Put yourself in Kubo's shoes. You can only really showcase one of these guys in full. Who are you going to pick? Sure, characters like Oetsu and Senjumaru are tantalizing, but at the end of the day, you're going to choose the legendary commander of the Zero Division himself, and it was the right move to make. As a result, Ichibei rose far above the rest as a pinnacle of power, someone who did actually live up to their hype and then some, earning him at the same time a great deal of respect from the readership. Kubo actually took the time and effort to detail Ichibei's entire ability set, and it paid off in a big way. It's really amazing how just one fully fleshed out battle can seriously round out an entire character. In my opinion, Ichibei's Zanpakuto, Ichimonji, turns out to not only be one of, if not the most powerful Zanpakuto in Bleach, but also one of the most creative as well, and stands out among the Thousand Year Blood War arc as one of my favourite new powers introduced. Then there's Yhwach himself, a man with a mysterious history that seems somehow linked to that of the Zero Division, something that not even the anime has fully explored yet. The source material, frustratingly, never revealed much about that connection between Ichibei and Yhwach, only dropping the smallest of hints. The idea that Ichibei maybe knew Yhwach somehow from back when the Quincy King was a troublesome brat, but the anime has already begun to rectify that too, already giving us an ancient flashback, a meeting between the two, and then even going so far as to showing that somehow Yhwach likely knew Ichibei from the time he was a young boy, from when the two of them must have coexisted in the primordial age, with a sinister Ichibei, a shadowy Ichibei, even being present at the moment of Soul King Adnias' fall. In fact, Yhwach's rampage has been far better contextualized than it ever was in the original story. Like I said earlier, you have to remember that during the run of the manga, we had no real idea why Yhwach was doing anything that he was doing. Why was he so desperate to reach the Soul King? Kubo gave us breadcrumbs. He drip-fed us tiny little teases, such as Yhwach calling the Soul King's palace a decrepit gravestone upon his arrival there, and while mystery is necessary in a narrative like this to keep people hooked, to keep people reading, a villain also needs a motive. It's perhaps one of the most crucial aspects to building one that's clear-cut and well-defined. And that's simply not something Yhwach had, and that's why, in my opinion, his character does kind of degrade and devolve over the course of the arc in the manga, but the anime has done a much better job of transforming Yhwach in that sense. We now know that Yhwach views the royal palace as a fraudulent disgrace. After learning the truth of what happened to his father so many years ago, Yhwach has come to set him free in a sense, and that is compelling, because in doing so he threatens to doom the entire Bleach universe. A universe made up of innocent people who had nothing to do with the downfall and treatment of Ryo, but who live as a result of it anyway, who live in and inhabit this world that, according to Yhwach, was built to forsake the Quincy, to shut them out of the cycle of rebirth, something that seemingly, according to him, was done so by his father's design, and that's a big source of the anger and resentment Yhwach feels towards his father, a complex mixture of emotions. At the same time, he wants to end his father's humiliation. And so now Yhwach's holy crusade against the royal palace works so much better with the wider context applied to it, and he even almost feels righteous in a sense, although I will of course always push back on that. Yhwach is, at the end of the day, a truly evil villain, while Ichibei's demonic, almost malevolent glee paints him in a much more villainous light. Bleach isn't the deepest series in the world, I don't think anyone's out here pretending it is, but there's no denying the shades of grey between these two figures are palpable. No one is truly in the right here, and that is awesome. Ichibei is clinging on to this idea of the status quo that is ultimately cruel and has been built upon the backs of major, horrible sacrifice, while Yhwach wants to upend everything. He wants to return the world to the way it was when he was last at peace with his father, but that is a world that is simply no longer tenable. Realistically, it wasn't tenable in the first place, which is why Adnaya seemingly did what he did. But Yhwach is a bloodthirsty warmonger who will stop at nothing to get his way, even if it means again the sacrifice of billions upon billions of beings. The idea of a just war is floated about early in the arc, and then kind of seemingly forgotten about as the Vandenreich are quickly transformed into genocidal maniacs, but here it does resurface for a bit. But Yhwach being involved here is interesting for another reason too. This is the first time we get to see him fight for real. Against Yamamoto, he only arrived right at the very end after the fighting was all but over, while against Ichigo, their duel is very brief and Yhwach overpowers Ichigo with ease and doesn't really have to do anything. But here, there are no tricks, there is no way out. Yhwach is taking to the front lines himself, and it promises to be glorious. Getting to see a Quincy of such immense power unleashing their strength is a sight indeed. So, how does the fight begin? What happens in the lead up to their face-off that takes the story to this explosive conclusion? We'll find out, but first, a word from today's sponsor. So, Jade, you're back just in time to help me celebrate the beauty of Yozakura, of nighttime cherry blossom viewing, with help from our friends at Tokyo Treat and Sakurako, who have prepared 2 brand new boxes for us to dive into and to help you out there experience Japan and its culture from the comfort of your own home.
Sakurako's theme this month is Moonlit Sakura, and the box has been designed to help you immerse yourself in the ephemeral beauty of Yozakura. Featuring a special limited edition design, Sakurako is a monthly Japanese artisan snack box that supports local snack makers across the country, with each box being carefully curated to include traditional and seasonal snacks that fit the theme. For example, this month some of the snack highlights include Sakura Dorayaki, Sakura Cream Cookie, and a Sakura Hibiscus Tea. You'll also receive a piece of exclusive tableware with Sakurako each month too. Right, so before we get into the snacks, I've got to show you the tableware this month because it's so cute. Look at it. Look
That
at
is
the
lovely.
Sakura. It's so
That's
pretty. First up, we're going to try the Sakura Wagashi. They're so pretty, and these are vegetarian friendly.
That very satisfying gelatinous feel, although it like Jade said, it's vegetarian friendly. Now, you guys know that I can't pass up the opportunity to try anything chocolate based, and here we go. This is the Sakura chocolate cookie.
It tastes like baked tart. That cherry. That's nice. Meanwhile,
Tokyo Treat's theme this month is Sakura Night's Snack Fest. Tokyo Treat is a fun and exclusive monthly snack box packed full of some of Japan's coolest treats. Each month you'll get a rare Kit Kat flavour and many of the latest snacks from Japan delivered straight to your door. To help you celebrate Yozakura, this month Tokyo Treat includes Twilight Truffle Chips, Sakura Sandwich Cookies, and more. Jade's going to crack into this month's exclusive Kit Kat, which is matcha latte flavour.
Exactly. Look how vibrant it is.
It's very green.
So pretty. Right.
It's very green.
Oh God, it's so green.
Very green.
I really think it tastes like birthday cake.
Weirdly, you're not wrong. Yeah, you're not wrong.
It tastes like birthday cake.
It does have
like a kid's party.
It does have a cake flavour to it, yeah. I'm not sure how many matcha birthday cakes
I'm
I've
getting the
had.
tea though.
Now, I wanted to try this last one, as this is maybe the fanciest looking gummy I've ever seen. Certainly the most elaborate gummy I've ever seen. This is the Goodnight Grape Gummies.
You ready? Do you
That's
want me
pretty
to
cool.
feed you?
Like a Roman emperor or something, yeah. Wow, look at that. There's a serious craftsmanship gone into that. That's
I really
rather
smell
impressive.
like grapes now. They look good. I mean, sadly,
I love
these
gummies.
ones aren't vegetarian, so I'm not trying these ones. But they
See, look, we're slowly taking them off. Look at that. I think that's one of my favourite things we've ever had.
That is so cool.
Each box also comes with a cultural guide booklet that tells you a little bit more about the snacks you receive each month, plus the month's chosen themes and how they are celebrated in Japan, as well as detailing that all-important allergen information. But that's it for April's boxes. As always, I want to say a big thank you to Tokyo Treat and Sakurako for supporting the channel. It really does mean a lot. Enjoy the beauty of nighttime cherry blossoms in your own home with some boxes for you or someone you love by following the link in the description or the pinned comment down below for an exclusive offer of $5 off your order. Thanks everyone, and enjoy. Yhwach's invasion of the royal palace is well underway by the time we reach chapter 604. In fact, Yhwach has just resurrected his Schutzstaffel with the Valen, robbing the unnecessary sternritter down below of much of their power and life force, instead feeding it to the king's archangels in order to restore them beyond their full power. If you've only watched the anime, it's here that the wheels completely fell off the battle in the royal palace in the manga. Lil Barrow blasts Oetsu Nimaya through the heart with the true power of the X-axis, Tenjiro and Hikifune unable to stop the strike, before Pernida Pankajaz used its heightened power of the compulsory to just pull apart Hikifune's cage of life, allowing Yhwach to escape. Now, I actually don't mind the idea of Pernida breaking open the cage using its true power, especially since Pernida is the left arm of the Soul King, but also I'm not entirely sure it makes sense. Certainly once you learn what Pernida is actually doing in this moment. Back here in chapter 604, we still had no idea what the compulsory was really doing. Was it telekinesis somehow? Was it moving things with its mind? Was Pernida using some kind of special psychic power? The answer, it turned out, was much different. In reality, Pernida was extending its nerves from within its body, running them over the trees of the cage and breaking it open by physical force, inserting its nerves into the trees to then break them open as though the nerves were an extension of Pernida's own hand. In theory, this could work now that Pernida's power has been increased tremendously, but we also know that Hikifune's cage of life is constantly eating reishi, to the point where it is so fast and so quick to devour things that Lil was unable to shoot it with his regular bullets. Even blasting between the tree trunks caused the trees to grow outwards immediately in order to swallow up the reishi. So, wouldn't the trees instantly devour Pernida's nerves the moment they made contact, since they are almost certainly made of reishi too? They are physical, tangible things. In fact, a more believable way out of the cage now would be to have Lil try to blast it again. Now that he isn't using bullets and is instead using the X-axis, it would absolutely work, because the X-axis isn't using reishi. Its ability is simply to destroy everything on that range. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Yhwach steps out of the cage and appears at the foot of the walkway into the real palace, which had been hidden away behind Senjumaru's fake version and Ichibei's own seal. Now that he's reached his true goal, there's only one being standing, or should I say sitting, in his way. The power dynamic on display here is fascinating to behold. Yhwach initially towers over Ichibei, the leader of the Zero Division appearing squat and defenseless before him. Yet, it's clear that Yhwach knows he can't just walk around the monk. He has to go right through him, or else he doesn't stand a chance. Yhwach demands that Ichibei lets them pass, using his full name as he does. But despite Yhwach's tattered cloak casting a grim shadow over Ichibei's eyes, the monk merely scoffs. Taking hold of the oversized calligraphy brush on his back, Ichibei gets to his feet, the weight and feeling of his authority building as he rises to his full height. Placing his brush in front of him, Ichibei warns Yhwach that he might lose his voice if he keeps saying his name in such a carefree way. And names, as you'll see, play the most crucial role of all in this fight. With Ichibei stepping up, Yhwach stares at him coldly, his gaze unmoving. Their battle is ready to begin. For as awesome and incredible as this setup actually was in the manga, it would have been so much better if we actually had some context of these two's past relationship by now, if we had had some kind of a flashback like we get in the anime. In the manga, you're only really excited to see this fight building up because of their respective standings in the military. You know they are both the bosses of either side, whereas in the anime has gone that little extra step further to build up a personal relationship as well, some actual historical context. Things start off fairly simply. The two warriors engage in a bit of light smack talk, with Ichibei painting out a short space on the walkway before them, joyfully telling Yhwach that he'll take him down within this arena. Sneering, however, Yhwach touches down upon the walkway and notes that the space is too far. Instead, Ichibei will die 3 steps short of it, with Yhwach using the monk's full name again, as if to prove the Zero Division leader can't back up his threats. However, as Ichibei draws a new seal at the end of the space he's designated, preventing anyone from passing it, the emotion, the atmosphere in the air suddenly shifts and the tension is dialed up. Glancing over his shoulder, Ichibei notes that he warned Yhwach about saying his name, when suddenly an enormous ethereal hand explodes towards the Quincy King, slamming into Yhwach and sending him rocketing from the side of the walkway out into the blue sky. The hand forces Yhwach back, the invader flung so hard that he's unable to right himself as he soars endlessly into the clouds above. Out of the blue, Ichibei's voice rings out, the monk appearing in the air above Yhwach, noting that the technique's name is Senri Sutensho, and that it sends whatever it touches flying for 300 miles, or no questions asked. Presumably that means that once Yhwach hit the 300-mile threshold, the ability's effect would wear off instantly, and in fact maybe by this point it already has, as in response Yhwach lifts his hand to Ichibei, preparing to call out an ability, only to find no sound coming from his throat. Smirking, Ichibei notes that he did warn Yhwach about losing his voice before conjuring a second hand, this time bringing it crashing down upon the Quincy King from above, sending him spiraling towards the Serete far below. I can't help but feel like most people went into this fight expecting Ichibei to obviously be extraordinarily powerful, but it was really once Yhwach opened his mouth and nothing came out, thereby confirming why he shouldn't have been saying Ichibei's name all this long, that Ichibei wasn't kidding when he said Yhwach would lose his voice. That's when people were like, oh, this guy actually is the real deal. This guy means business. That was certainly the way I thought of it anyway. Now, if you take a moment to look at the little details and nuances here, this is a great and interesting opening to the fight. For starters, the most obvious conclusion is that for whatever reason, Ichibei does not want to kill Yhwach. Instead, he's focusing on forcing the Quincy King as far away from the palace as possible, as quickly as possible, sending him hurtling back to the Serete in as little as 2 moves. Now this could mean a few things. Perhaps Ichibei is just insulting Yhwach, trying to show him that he barely needs to lift a finger in order to quash Yhwach's entire advance. Or, more interestingly, maybe this betrays a lack of confidence from Ichibei. Is he worried about Yhwach getting too close to the palace after all? That last one seems a little unlikely to me, but it is the more intriguing possibility. But also, look at how easily Ichibei swatted away his foe. Without even wielding his Zanpakuto, Ichibei forced Yhwach roughly 600 miles back once he pushed him that way and then down, barely even breaking a sweat. One thing that I think is easy to overlook is the sense of scale found in this opening. Remember that this fight is occurring extremely far above the Serete. We're quite literally in the heavens, meaning there is an extraordinary amount of space to move around in, and Kubo takes that opportunity with both hands. Yhwach is sent screaming down towards the ground at an incredible speed, and there is just nothing around for miles here. In instances like these, I think the use of an entire page is justified to really get across just how far and how fast Yhwach is falling. But as he falls, Yhwach punctures his throat with his own 2 fingers, drawing in power and using it to give himself a voice. Remember as well that Yhwach can freely give and take power, and that power can take any form. So all he's doing here is restoring his lost voice by pulling in power directly to his throat. You know what would have been kind of cool though? Now that Gremmy is dead, the V Shrift has returned to Yhwach. Imagine if he was able to generate any kind of ability based on the letters that have returned to him by now, and so in this sense, awakened his voice again with the voice. It would have been stupidly broken and probably wouldn't make much sense, but that's kind of Yhwach's deal, right? Anyway, in all seriousness, this next sequence is fantastic, and a great example of the awesome choreography that this fight is full of. As he falls, Yhwach, now with a voice, unleashes Zankt Borgen, conjuring a colossal bow lined with massive arrows beneath him, again showing us the incredible scale on show here. The bow fires its volley of titanic arrows, one of the arrows impaling Yhwach through the back in order to send him flying back to Ichibei up in the air, while the other arrows zip into the sky around the monk, one of them clipping and slicing him across the back, drawing blood from beneath his Haori. With Yhwach going so far as to shoot himself with an arrow in order to be propelled back to the battlefield, Ichibei realizes that he might have underestimated just how terrifying and motivated Yhwach really is. And more importantly, how strong his conviction can be. As Yhwach shatters the arrow in his chest, the arrow, by the way, looking, I would say, considerably smaller now than it was when it was fired from the blade, Ichibei turns to him grumbling. The monk notes that Yhwach says his name, even though he tells him not to. He returns to the battlefield, even though he was sent away as punishment. Despite growing old, Yhwach still appears to be a little troublemaker. It was this very line that spurred on the speculation surrounding Ichibei and Yhwach's potential history. Did Ichibei know Yhwach when he was an actual physical child, for example? It kind of seems like it based on the little bits and pieces we saw early in part 3, but to be honest, I think this can also absolutely refer to their meeting from 1,000 years ago that we saw in episode 24. After all, Yhwach has aged since then, and he's still disobeying Ichibei all these years later. Because of course, remember, back in that meeting too, Yhwach used Ichibei's full name and Ichibei scolded him for it, so this feels like it could just be a continuation of that. It adds a nice additional wrinkle to their dynamic. But with Yhwach completely defiant in the face of Ichibei's power, the monk turns to him, his face painted in a sinister black shadow, and he ominously states that Yhwach has left him no choice. Ichibei has to kill him. Again, there's that sense that Ichibei didn't necessarily want to kill Yhwach, but regardless, the gauntlet has been thrown. Yhwach immediately draws his sword from his Quincy cross, while Ichibei readies his Zanpakuto. The battle is truly on. The two of them lock weapons repeatedly, Ichibei's calligraphy brush clashing with Yhwach's sword, the air around them rippling with shockwaves. As their weapons push against one another, Yhwach muses that Ichibei's face has changed, and indeed it has. From the moment he noted he was going to kill Yhwach, Ichibei's face has taken on a terrifying, monstrous appearance. Kubo is drawing him in such a fantastic, evocative, emotive way, and Ichibei begins to feel like this larger-than-life character who takes on an entirely new persona. Yhwach says that he could have never guessed that Ichibei's face would come so alive when he resolved to kill the Quincy King, and Yhwach breaks away from their clash, thrusting his blade towards Ichibei's face. The monk narrowly dodges it, however, and responds by bringing his brush downwards in a sweeping arc, only for Yhwach to bat it aside casually with his arm. Yhwach gloats that Ichibei's face appears to be all that's changed, however, when suddenly his left arm drops to his side, dangling, helpless and weak. Ichibei reveals the power of his brush. It doesn't cut flesh, but names. As a result, the name of Yhwach's arm has been cut in two, and now it can only be referred to as an R. Of course, this ability looks a little weird in English, but it does still work. In the original Japanese, one of the characters that makes up the word arm can simply be removed in order to achieve the desired effect, but here we need to drop a letter. So ARM becomes AR. As Ichibei has noted before, and as all of Bleach has demonstrated up until now, all power resides in names. So, with only half a name, Yhwach's arm has lost half of its former strength. It feels heavier, it moves slower, and it can only do half of what it used to be able to do. Yhwach attempts to swing at Ichibei, though interestingly here in the manga it is quite obviously the other arm he's using, but there you go. As he does so, however, his strike barely registers to Ichibei, having become so feeble. With Yhwach defenseless, Ichibei draws his brush down the middle of the Quincy King's entire body, rendering his entire self weakened greatly. Yhwach has now become Yhwach, or YHW, and Ichibei sends him flying back towards the palace with a hefty swing, Yhwach crashing down onto the walkway, right within the space that Ichibei designated. With Yhwach seemingly at his mercy, Ichibei displays a truly terrifying grin, his face twisted and contorted, his eyes are bulging blood red as he asks the Quincy King how it feels to be smashed to pieces by the leader of the Shinigami that he hates so much, with only half of his power. However, as chapter 606 comes to a close, Yhwach rises to his feet again as a ring of blue energy surges around him. I always loved that the energy surrounding Yhwach was decorated with Roman numerals. It's just a cool, ultimately superfluous touch that helps it to feel ancient somehow. And considering that same detailing is shown when Royd uses Zangtschwinger against Yamamoto in the first invasion, it feels like it is unique to Yhwach's Holy Spirit energy, which is an awesome detail. Grinning, Yhwach remarks that the leader of the Zero Division fears his power so much, he felt the need to cut it in half. What could possibly feel better than that? Holding out his hand, Yhwach gathers the power that now swirls around him, pouring it into his chest as he tells Ichibei that he can restore the power that was cut in half. Now, this is an interesting little moment, and I have a couple of questions about it. Does this mean that in this moment Yhwach restored his name as well, thus removing Ichibei's own power? Because I'm not sure about that, though it's possible that simply returning his own power to himself and, filling his tank up again, so to speak, has reversed the effects brought on by Ichibei's own ability, and perhaps that extends to Yhwach's name as well. The other question I have revolves around Yhwach's power itself. When he restores said stolen power to himself, where is that power coming from? We know that Yhwach can give and take power freely, but surely that taken power has to come from somewhere. He can't just materialize it out of thin air. So it's almost as though he steals it from some random soldat still remaining down below. The Schutzstaffel? I have no idea, but presumably it comes from somewhere. So in this moment, is he robbing someone of their strength, or is he maybe drawing power from the very world around him? If anyone could do that, presumably a Quincy could. Anyways, Yhwach declares to Ichibei that everything in this world is his for the taking, maybe confirming that he is drawing power from the world surrounding him itself. He transforms that surging power around him into a series of blue energy blades that angle upwards from the ground, following the direction of Yhwach's outstretched sword. Those blades spiral towards Ichibei at breakneck speed, transforming into arrows as they go. Awesome detail. But as soon as they reach Ichibei, the Zero Division leader simply crushes them between his hands, shattering the blades into pieces. As Ichibei muses that he cut Yhwach's power in half to preserve his honor, he suddenly bounds towards his enemy with a crazed look on his face. Ichibei announces that by cutting his power in half, he hoped to help Yhwach save face with the Quincy's when he inevitably lost. But as he wordlessly draws Bakudo 62 Hyaporankan around himself in a wide arc, Ichibei admits that honor means nothing when you're dead anyway. And that's kind of an interesting worldview for someone like Ichibei to have, because to me at least, that puts him at odds with what the Shinigami would likely believe, who themselves are very much based off of samurai, the archetypal honourable warrior. But here we are treated to a very satisfying little back and forth between the two sides, where the choreography amps up a bit more, allowing the characters to clash with spells and barriers in an impressive display. Ichibei slings Hyaporankan towards Yhwach, but the Quincy King opens his hand to the ground, expelling Blute Vein from his very body, which is kind of gross when you think about it, especially when it actually looks like veins coming out of his wrist, even though it's just reishi, but it's still kind of weird. The blue network of energy spreads along the floor around Yhwach before generating a protective dome around him, causing the glowing bars of Hyaporankan to simply smash into it, rebounding from the sides. Ichibei is surprised, wondering if this is Blue Vein in action, to which Yhwach responds that the technique is called Blue Vein Avhaben, allowing a Quincy to expand the protective layer of Blue Vein to outside the body as well. A really cool technique, and I wonder how difficult it is to use. For example, Masaki was noted as being extraordinarily talented with Blue Vein, so would she have been able to do this, or is this really something that only someone of Yhwach's caliber can utilize? It would have been cool to see this power again, maybe used by a sternritter instead, but I imagine it does require a very high level of skill to work. And considering Blue Vein is basically completely forgotten about in the manga outside of this moment, I guess it kind of makes sense that we never saw it again. It's also curious that while Ichibei again has clearly heard of Blue Vein, he doesn't seem to have seen it before, unless he's just wondering if this dome has a connection to that innate Quincy power. With his Hyaporankan broken, Ichibei slams on the brakes, coming to a stop in mid-air before unleashing Secret Hado number 3, Teppusatsu, with a massive chop, bringing his hand down in order to conjure the enormous pale emerald face of a gigantic wind dragon. Breathing in deep, the wind dragon blows a gale of immense force towards Yhwach, breaking his Blue Vein Avhaben to pieces. Now, introducing the idea of Secret Hado this late into the story is definitely an interesting move by Kubo. It makes total sense for Ichibei of all characters to be able to use something like this, but as I talked about in my ranking of the best Kido users in Bleach, it opens such a can of worms, in my opinion, bringing so many new questions to the table. For example, what makes a Hado secret? Who exactly knows about them? And why is it a secret? Is Teppusatsu considerably more powerful than most normal Hado, maybe even the Hado in the 90s? And if so, where does it fall in the rankings? There does seem to be a distinction between a secret Hado and a forbidden one, as Yamamoto's Hado 96, Ito Kaso, is apparently forbidden, but presumably not secret. I believe Ito Kaso is forbidden because it uses the wielder's body as a catalyst, whereas Teppusatsu doesn't seem to have any ill effects whatsoever for the user. To be honest, I was kind of hoping that the creator of Kido might be among the Zero Division, which would explain something like this, but alas. Anyway, with Yhwach exposed once more, the remnants of Blue Vein Avhaben floating away like smashed glass, Ichibei lunges for him with a deranged look on his face, grabbing the Quincy King by the throat. However, upon making physical contact with Yhwach's skin, Ichibei's arm is suddenly swarmed by blue energy veins of power. Interestingly, I feel like this should just be an ability of Yhwach's in the same way he gives his power to Ichigo later through his sword, but I mean here he notes it's a result of his Blue Vein Avhaben, which has expanded his Blue Vein to not only just be outside the body, but to anything that comes into contact with him. So this is separate to when he feeds Ichigo his power from his sword later on? With Ichibei's body being rapidly invaded now by Yhwach's power, it looks like it is over for the Zero Division leader, with the blue veins even encroaching upon his eye. However, with a mighty push, Ichibei forcefully repels Yhwach's power from his body with sheer heft, essentially pushing it back out of his veins, presumably by running his own power through them in a manner very similar to what Quincy can do. Yhwach's power is forced back through his arm and into his face before his face explodes in a rain of blood. Honestly, that sentence sounds insane to say out loud, as the two fighters dive backwards, putting distance between them as they skid across the walkway. You see what I mean? This fight is so awesome already, and really we're only just getting started. Seething with rage at Yhwach's impudence, Ichibei scolds him for first trespassing into the royal palace and then trespassing into the body of a vassal of the Soul King himself. There is no greater dishonor. As blood pours down Yhwach's face now, and I don't understand, by the way, how his face isn't completely destroyed, but there you go. Ichibei brings his brush before him, and in a stroke of black ink activates his Shikai with the command, "Paint it black, Ichimonji." At the moment of activation, all that is black in the world begins to slowly seep towards the heavens. We see an unusually tranquil scene at the start of chapter 608 as we visit a stream far outside the Serete. I actually really like this shot. It is cool to see the transformed Serete from far away, but I like the way the image juxtaposes the rising smoke and the faint sounds of battle to what's going on outside, which is essentially life as normal. If you look at the transformed Serete from so far away, you can maybe tell that something is happening. You would have no idea that this is the biggest war the Soul Society has ever known. By the way, how do these creatures exist here? Are these deer born naturally in the Soul Society, or are they the souls of dead deer moved on? Anyway, we see a small black newt on the riverbed, and from its skin, the black appears to peel away at the beck and call of Ichibei's new power. Revealing Ichimonji in full, the difference is minimal. The brush head has been replaced with a thick, wide blade from which a stream of black ink appears to flow. I'm going to chime in here and say that I think it is indisputable that Ichimonji, and by extension Ichibei's power, is portrayed and looks much better here in the manga. While it absolutely works in the anime just fine, there's no doubt that it was made for this medium. I mean, it looks absolutely incredible here, especially on Kubo's patented white backgrounds. It's as though Ichibei is altering the very work itself. While Ichibei's power is technically just black and not a physical ink, that is the form Kubo chooses to depict it in, and it works wonders here. Yhwach suddenly mistakes the blade for the brush head itself, and Ichibei mocks him, wondering if he can no longer tell the difference between the two. With an almighty clash, the two opponents lock blades, sending a stream of black ink bursting into the open sky behind them. And it's of course curious that Yhwach is slowly unable to tell the difference between the base form of Ichimonji and the Shikai form, because Ichimonji is one of the only Zanpakuto in the entire series, if not the only one, off the top of my head, that has an actual ability while in base, before having its Shikai released. They continue to trade swings, with Ichimonji splashing ink all over the place with every move. Confident in the face of Ichibei's Zanpakuto, Yhwach comments that Ichimonji doesn't seem to be cutting anything, and if it's just a blade that cuts names all over again, then it's useless, for he's already proven he can restore any power that's stolen from him. As Yhwach prepares to proudly announce the name of his own blade, however, he suddenly falters, for no name comes to him. Looking down, Yhwach realizes his sword has been drenched in black by Ichibei, completely removing the weapon's name. Again, the way Kubo uses ink in this battle makes it feel so unique to me, and it's one of my favourite powers in the manga. I love that the name of Yhwach's sword in his speech bubble is actually just painted over. It makes Ichibei feel godly in a way that is almost very meta. He's interfering with the world of Bleach itself in the way that makes the most sense to us, by actually interfering with the page before our very eyes, by transforming in real time the manga we are reading. Now on the flip side, I've always wondered about this moment. Firstly, it's pretty contrived that Yhwach would suddenly want to call out the name of his sword in this moment. I did entertain the idea that maybe he was just going to say, "My sword will," and Ichibei's power removed the word sword, making the weapon literally nameless, but I don't think it is that, because Ichibei goes on to elaborate that Yhwach's sword has no name. But also it's funny that if Yhwach's sword does indeed have a name, that we literally never learn it, even though we learn that it has one. That feels like the kind of detail that Kubo might one day give up in a club outside answer. Either way, here Ichimonji's power is revealed. Anything that it paints over loses its name, and therefore its power. Revealing he has already covered both Yhwach's sword and Quincy Cross in black, the monk grins madly, wondering how Yhwach plans to kill him with such useless items. So, seemingly desperate, Yhwach flings his hand out and simply declares that if his power is now unusable, he will instead steal Ichibei's own power and use it against him. Activating the ability of Sanct Altar, Yhwach conjures a gigantic Quincy cross in the sky above Ichibei, casting a blue glow across the battlefield. This ability is the same power that Yhwach placed inside the medallions through which the sternritter steal Bankai, so the idea is that it literally rips power from the person. Yhwach tries to steal Ichibei's power, presumably either his control over black, or just the black that he already has control over to then use for his own means. But nothing seems to happen. While initially it looks as though the black is being robbed from Ichibei himself, he suddenly stands firm, the darkness dissipating from around him. I'll be honest, in the manga particularly, I've never fully understood this sequence. I'm not entirely sure why Yhwach's ability doesn't work here. Well, I mean, that's not quite right either, as Ichibei notes that actually he did steal his power, but for some reason the power Yhwach stole doesn't belong to him. The anime actually changes this a little bit too. Yhwach does seemingly manage to steal the power to control black, as he also robs Ichibei of the black in his hair, for example, and even adds that black to his own reishi flame, darkening it. To be honest, I think it's because all the black in the world already belongs to Ichibei from the moment he activates his Shikai. We saw, of course, it passively leaving the newt and heading towards Ichibei. So, Yhwach does steal the power to control black, but it is too late, as all of it is already under Ichibei's command. Is that correct? Or is it more accurate to say that Yhwach literally just steals the black that Ichibei has gathered to attack with in that moment, as the black itself is the power? But obviously Ichibei can take black from wherever and whoever he likes, so his power is endless compared to what fragment Yhwach stole from him in that moment. Like I said, I'm not honestly sure. Either way, gathering all that black to him, even from the corpses of dead Shinigami and Quincy far beneath in the Serete and beyond, Ichibei then brings his weapon down with an incredible stroke, covering Yhwach's entire form in black from head to toe. Another thing I love here is how sometimes Kubo will transform Ichibei's speech bubbles, turning them into black splashes of ink themselves. It's another great touch, and yet another way Kubo was able to use the medium of manga to his advantage in this fight, creating a character who fights in a way that really makes it feel as though he is taking control of the art and the page itself. But Ichibei's attack is so all-consuming that even after Yhwach's body is coated in darkness, the ink crashes across the sky for miles in a tidal wave of black, raining down to the earth below. Having removed Yhwach's name completely now, Ichibei draws his hand across his Zanpakuto and casually releases his Shinuchi, or true blade, swiftly replacing the brush head of his Shikai with a trail of flowing white ink. As a speechless Yhwach looks on, Ichibei reveals the name of this ability to be Shirafude Ichimonji as the white ink encircles the two fighters from above. Ichibei muses that if he had to use the more modern term, he supposes this form would be called Bankai, which is a really cool moment. There's no better way to illustrate just how far above everyone else Ichibei is than by having him massively downplay activating Bankai. Even the name Bankai barely holds significance to him, as it's something he came up with, but to this day he'd rather use the original name for the form that he likely coined as well. Ichibei even goes on to state that long before Bankai was born in this world, his Shirafude Ichimonji was the first evolved Zanpakuto. So, what does this mean exactly? Long before the name Bankai was invented, or long before anyone actually attained what would later be known as Bankai? Honestly, it's probably both. Ichibei was seemingly the first Shinigami ever to access a second form for his Zanpakuto, hence the name True Blade. Honestly, aside from the Soul King himself, there is no character I want to learn more about than Ichibei, and even then he and Adnias go hand in hand in many ways. But, drawing his Bankai about himself, the trail of white dancing ethereally through the air, Ichibei reveals that Shirafude Ichimonji can write a new name, bestow a new name on whatever is painted over by his Shikai originally. And this is why, despite it obviously being massively powerful, and frankly broken in many ways, I'm often reticent to include Shirafude Ichimonji on lists of the strongest Bankai, due to it being completely unique in the sense that it actively needs its Shikai to have been used first to be able to do anything at all. But even then, I still think it's easily one of the strongest Bankai in the series, and it's, I think, up there on the top of my list. But Ichibei has covered Yhwach in black ink and totally erased his name, and in its place, he paints a new name over the Quincy King, Black Ant. In doing so, Ichibei has transformed Black Ant's power into that of a black ant crawling on the ground, and notes Black Ant is now but a fragile and fleeting life. This is cool too. In the same way that Ichimonji removes power, Shirafude Ichimonji's ink can completely alter a target's properties to match what Ichibei has renamed them to be. So, while Black Ant's outward appearance hasn't changed, while his actual physical makeup remains the same, he is now quite literally as weak and as fragile as an ant, meaning Ichibei is now ready to make the final move. Again, in this sense, Shirafude Ichimonji feels a little bit weird. Black Ant was surely technically weaker when he had no power at all, and had been robbed of his name entirely after the final move Ichibei made with his Shikai. So Ichibei renaming him to Black Ant actually gives him a tiny little bit of strength on top of the nothing he had before, and was clearly just a spiteful mocking move on the Zero Division leader's part. Lifting his foot and conjuring a gigantic reishi foot in the air above him, much like he manifested enormous hands at the start of the battle, Ichibei prepares to crush Black Ant, killing him as easily as he would a bug, snuffing out his life. Now, the next line is interesting to me. Ichibei tells Black Ant to bear the lives of the Shinigami you've killed, which, I don't know, doesn't really sound like Ichibei to me. I can't imagine he's that bothered about the dead Shinigami in the grand scheme of things. That sounds like something Yamamoto would, and in fact did, say instead. If anything, Ichibei would be much angrier about Black Ant having the audacity to trespass on his father's holy ground. But Ichibei brings his foot down in a calamitous stomp upon Black Ant's head, sending the Quincy King rocketing downwards into the abyss far below. In the manga, we are treated to this lovely shot of Hashwalth's hair taking up almost the entire panel as he looks on in horror at his falling king. Of course, in the anime, Hashwalth is still currently trapped within Senjumaru's Bankai at this time. Gazing into the vast expanse of endless sky from on high, Ichibei bids a solemn farewell to the king of the bugs, before he brings his hands together, a pair of spectral hands closing in on Black Ant as he falls, seemingly crushing him for good. However, as Ichibei turns away from the battle and we reach the end of chapter 609, something happens. As Black Ant falls from the palace covered in black, he suddenly opens his eyes, screaming that he had no idea he could see this much with his eyes shut. As he says so, his irises begin to rapidly shake and split apart as a violent torrent of bright blue energy erupts behind Ichibei, bursting up through the wooden floorboards. As Ichibei twists on the spot, he's suddenly impaled through the chest by a huge blade, blood spewing from between his lips. As the leader of the Zero Division doubles over, gripping the sword in his hand, he can only watch in horror with wide eyes, as the power of his Bankai, the white characters on Black Ant's body, begin to crumble away into nothing. Witnessing his majesty's awakening, Hashwalth explains to Uryu the true nature of Yhwach's power. His letter is A, the Almighty, ending chapter 609 with an awesome double-page spread of the resurgent Quincy King, still mostly covered in black ink, but standing tall and proud all the same. Now, in the manga, this moment was always a little abrupt, out of nowhere, and frankly weird. After all, if we go by the rules and logic dictated of this very battle, from the moment Yhwach lost his power thanks to Ichimonji, he shouldn't have been able to even awaken the Almighty. The Almighty is, after all, one of Yhwach's abilities, all of which was stripped away from him when he was covered from head to toe in Ichimonji's ink. And not only that, but again, following the rules laid out before us, when Ichibei rewrote his enemy's properties to be those of an ant, Yhwach should have straight up died when Ichibei crushed him, so what happened? In the manga, no explanation for Yhwach's survival is really given. It just looks like, and you as a reader are forced to accept, that Yhwach's the Almighty automatically activated even though his powers were gone, and it seemingly somehow overwrote everything else. But the anime thankfully gives us a little more context to this moment, and helps it to work a lot better. Back in episode 24, we were shown a brand new flashback featuring Ichibei meeting Yhwach in the human world prior to Yhwach's invasion of the Soul Society over 1,000 years ago, which we've talked about before. There, Yhwach ends up stealing the power of the left arm of the Soul King from Ichibei, who intended to kill the Quincy King with it once he learned the truth about his father. However, upon stealing the left arm of the Soul King for himself, Yhwach unwittingly sealed away his own power of the Almighty due to it being quashed by his father's strength, his father who wielded the true, ultimate form of the Almighty, the only one to escape Yhwach's eyes. And Ichibei noted as they ended their meeting that Yhwach's eyes will now never again be open until the day he dies. And so, this is that moment 1,000 years later, the day of Yhwach's death. It can be surmised then that Ichibei does in fact kill Yhwach, or at least come so close, right to the edge of oblivion, that the Almighty is awakened once again, allowing Yhwach to restore himself to full strength. This, by the way, is effective foreshadowing. Ichibei mentioning something a few episodes prior that directly correlates to and reflects upon something that later happens, that you can then look back on in the story and think, oh yeah, that was referenced here, we just didn't know the truth of it yet. However, I do have an issue with this new revelation that the anime has brought about. We obviously still don't know the truth of the circumstances behind Yamamoto failing to kill Yhwach, but if he hit Yhwach with such effectiveness as to reduce Yhwach somehow to a comatose, sealed state, again, I really hope that part of the timeline is fleshed out in Core 4 because we do need it. Why didn't Yhwach's Almighty awaken then? Because presumably he was at the edge of death there like he is here. Anyway, as we begin chapter 610, well, this is where the anime deviates even further from the source material. In the manga, Hashwolf and Uryu are casually discussing Yhwach's true power, while presumably the Schutzstaffel battle the rest of the Zero Division off-screen. In the anime, Hashwolf is, well, explaining Yhwach's power to no one as he's set free from Senjumaru's Bankai. I'm being a little facetious, I assume you're supposed to think he's explaining it to Senjumaru, but considering at that point she is actually physically fighting Uryu at the time, it is a bit weird. Interestingly, the hold Senjumaru's Bankai has over the Schutzstaffel is broken by their individual powers being seemingly bolstered by the awakening of Yhwach's the Almighty, which in turn powers up the Quincy once again, with even Senjumaru noting that Uryu can feel the pulse of his king's awakened power now coursing through his veins. And of course, it's this awakening of Yhwach's the Almighty that causes Uryu's own Volstendish to awaken for the first time too. Hashwolf recites the Kaiser Gesang, explaining that Yhwach regains his pulse after 900 years, his mind after 90 years, and his power after 9 years. And now those 9 years are up. It's a little bit odd really, considering the 9 years were up I mean, what are we, a week after the start of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc at this point? Why didn't Yhwach just wait that extra week before attacking and destroy the Gotei 13 with the Almighty from the very beginning? Anyway, Hashwolf notes that Yhwach kept his eyes closed because otherwise his Almighty could have run rampant and robbed the powers of all the sternritter. Again, this seems to conflict with the idea the anime created that Yhwach could awaken his Almighty again only at the time of his death, which would imply he had no control over when he opened his eyes or not. Regardless, Hashwolf declares that the time for their 1,000-year prayer to be answered has finally come. Personally, I think that's a really cool line, and one Kubo could have probably done a bit more with, as it really gives you an idea of how the Quincy see Yhwach and have seen him for the last millennia. They've been living in secret, in shadows, for 1,000 years, and probably quite literally praying to and hoping Yhwach would one day return to destroy their enemies and lead them all to salvation. Yhwach explains then the extent of his true power to Ichibei, revealing that from this moment on, he can see everything that will unfold into the distant future, and he can know everything he sees too. All powers that he sees cannot be used again, and cannot be used to harm him. I'm not entirely sure how literal that last part is, considering Yhwach does take damage at points from here on out, though very rarely, to be fair. But if you thought the Almighty was broken now, just you wait. If this was all Yhwach's power was, then maybe it wouldn't be the single most busted ability in Bleach, though it would still be up there, of course. For now, though, this is his power, to see into the future and to know all powers used against him. Now, another thing that's always perplexed me is, does Ichibei not know what the Almighty can do? I would have figured, considering his close proximity to Adnias, and his meeting with Yhwach 1,000 years ago, that he would know exactly what this transformation means, but he doesn't seem to here at all. Instead, he arrogantly proclaims that he won't lose, and Kubo continues to do a wonderful job with the character's expressions. Ichibei roars that while Yhwach may know all, the Quincy King has still been stripped of the name Yhwach, and crucially all black still belongs to Ichibei, meaning that nothing's really changed. In both the manga and the anime, Ichibei begins an elaborate ritual where he starts to dance and sing, chanting an eerie verse as he conjures a dish in his hand, collecting and drinking up the ominous darkness that is swarming him and the battlefield. The anime drenches this whole sequence in a really cool black and grey colour scheme, and then, once Ichibei prepares to actually activate his ultimate technique, a wave of energy washes over everything, changing it once again, outlining the characters in blood red as Futen Taisatsuryō comes into effect. Thousands of skulls bursting out of the ground at their feet, the jet black death mausoleum rising up behind Ichibei as he stands with his hands clasped together, his blade rammed into the ground before him as his necklace of beads rises up above his head. It's a very powerful image, and Futen Taisatsuryō in both manga and anime is an incredible looking ability. I do wish the anime kept Ichibei's beads floating like they are in the manga. That helps to give this technique an otherwise a very otherworldly feel, but otherwise it is really awesome stuff. Surrounding the mausoleum, erupting from the earth, are graves. Gravestones lining every inch of the ability, Ichibei revealing that they are dedicated to none other than Yhwach himself, that they were erected from knights stolen from the Soul Society 100 years from now. How crazy is that? That is a godly power if I've ever seen one. To conjure this ability, Ichibei not only had to gather such an insurmountable amount of black as to actually have to strip away Nightfall itself, but he can somehow reach into the future, 100 years into the future, to do so. Absolutely crazy to think that 100 years from now, the Soul Society is just going to have a few days where night doesn't arrive at all. Thankfully, Ichibei explains to us what Futen Taisatsuryō can do, since we don't actually see it. It will soak up every ounce of black on Yhwach, the black he wears, and turn his blood flesh and bones black before returning them to nothingness. Ichibei signs off with one final dreadful detail. Not even rebirth will be tolerated, meaning Yhwach will be removed, erased from the cycle of rebirth itself. However, as Ichibei speaks his final words, he tells Yhwach to fall into a pitch black hell, only for the Quincy King to say the exact same thing at the exact same time, proving he knew exactly what Ichibei was about to say, and that his power to see the future is no joke. Horrified, Ichibei can only look on as Yhwach explains that he told him he can see all, and as Yhwach's eyes begin to change once more, the Quincy King muses that Ichibei seems to believe that he is still without a name. But as Kubo pulls back to reveal Yhwach in all his majestic, divine, and terrifying glory, his eyes now made up of 3 individual irises each, he proclaims himself Yhwach, the one who will rob Ichibei of everything. In the anime, Ichibei leaps at Yhwach with his blade outstretched in one last desperate attempt to complete the ritual of Futen Taisatsuryō. All he needs to do is land his hit, but it's too late. Using the almighty, Yhwach blasts Ichibei's body to smithereens, the Zero Division leader exploding into bloody chunks of flesh and bone before the king's open hand. I have to say, I think the manga version of Yhwach's final proclamation does look better. For some reason, the anime pulls the camera in really close to his face, I guess to emphasize his eyes, but I like the more complete shot of looking up at him from below here in the manga. But both are ultimately cool, and as I said, the anime has gone a long way to helping this not only make more sense, but to flow better too. With Ichibei's body annihilated at the end of chapter 610, we move into chapter 611 briefly, as the monk's decapitated head hits the floor in front of Yhwach with a sickening thud in a puddle of blood. Yhwach moves beyond Ichibei's scattered body parts, again a really cool visual, especially in the manga, where Kubo uses perspective in such a masterful way to show us Ichibei's foot up close, yet his head lying some ways back as Yhwach strolls beyond him. Honestly, I used to think, like I said earlier, the ending of this fight was a big letdown in the manga. After easily one of, if not the best fights of the arc to date, it all comes to a close so abruptly after Yhwach just conveniently and magically unlocks a new power at death's door, a power we'd never even heard of before. But there's no doubt the new flashback in episode 24 of the anime goes a long way to making this better. But with his opposition bested, Yhwach obliterates Ichibei's seal that was protecting the Soul King's palace and prepares to face his father. In the manga, this is where he announced that the Zero Division had fallen, and we received shots of their unceremonious off-screen defeats. But, well, again, thanks to the anime, we now have a much clearer idea of what actually happens with the entire fight now known to us, which is fantastic. But anyway, that's it for our latest Bleach Battle Analysis, Ichibei Hyosebe vs Yhwach, one that is definitely overdue, but one that I've really been looking forward to talking about. This is one of, if not the absolute best fights of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, and as we close out here, I want to leave you with one final question for you to answer down in the comments. Is this fight better in the anime or the manga? This is a fight that I was really looking forward to seeing played out in the anime. I was kind of expecting it to be given the same sort of treatment as Yamamoto versus Royd, but it wasn't. But of course the reason for that was because priorities were different at the end of the second core. There, the anime was focused on giving us what we really wanted for so many years, which is the battle between the Zero Division and the Schutzstaffel. So ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, an old-time fan of the series, a veteran fan, I was more than happy to accept the trade-off. But yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts regarding the battle between Ichibei and Yhwach. Let me know down in the comments below. Do you like this fight? Would you have liked to have seen more from this fight? How do you think this fight could have gone differently? Do please let me know all of your thoughts. I'd really love to hear them. Thanks again for watching, guys. This has been a long one. I do apologize, but I really did enjoy making it. Like I said, I want to try and do one of these battle analysis videos, one a month potentially, as they are a lot of fun. Consider hitting subscribe if you enjoyed today's video. It really does make a huge difference. Share the video around with your friends, other fellow Bleach fans. I'd love to get their thoughts on it as well. And do continue to show your support for the channel. Help us grow. It is greatly appreciated. And go and do the same over on Mr. Tomo Talks Games as well. Again, your support would make the world of difference over there. If you enjoy games, even slightly the gaming industry, discussions around that, I'd love to hear all of your thoughts over there too. Alright everyone, thank you once again for watching. Until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.